I'm going to be talking about food labels today and how you can understand them. I think sometimes manufacturers do make food labeling very complex and there is no consistency between different manufacturers, and it can make it very difficult for us to understand what is in a product. I do think that in many cases that is completely deliberate on the part of the manufacturer, because they don't really want us to understand what it is that we're eating. But if we look at the calorific requirement for men and women, you'll see women need around about 2,000 calories, men 2.5. The fat content of the diet should be around 70 grams for women, 95 grams for men. But you'll see that both sodium and salt is the same for both men and women. And it can be confusing because sometimes manufacturers will put sodium on a label and we don't really know what's the difference between sodium and salt, which is a right amount for us to be having. So 1 gram of sodium is around about equivalent to 2.5 grams of salt, and it's the sodium within salt that can lead to problems, and particularly with the heart. So an adult should have no more than 6 grams of salt a day, and that's equivalent to about 2.5 grams of sodium. So if you can keep those figures in your head when you're looking at food labels, you'll be able to better understand the salt and sodium content of a food. Ingredients have to be listed in weight order from high to low. So the nearer that an ingredient is to the top of a list, the more there is of it in a particular food. So if you see sugar as number 1 or 2 or 3 on the list of ingredients, that's already giving you a clue there's probably more sugar in there than you really ought to be having. But how much is a little or a lot per 100 grams? So a lot of sugar is 10 grams. And if you can think back to when we first talked about low GL and we talked about various cereals, they can have as much as 23 grams per 100. So you can see that's not just a lot, that's a large amount. But a little is just 2 grams. Total fat content, a lot again is 20 grams, whereas a little is 3 grams. Saturated fat, 5 grams, is a lot to have, but 1 gram is just a little, that's okay. Now fibre, we do want to see more fibre in the diet, so 3 grams is actually good, and if there's only 1 gram in a food, then we know that's too low. So if you see the salt content is 1.25 grams per 100, you know that's too much. It needs to be around 0.25. And sodium content, if that's 0.5 grams, you know that's too much. It should only be around 0.1. We've talked about the glycemic index before as being a measure of how fast the sugar in a food hits your bloodstream. High GL values are 70 and above, medium 56 to 69, and low GI 55 and below. And generally, most low GI foods will also be low GL, but you've got to be thinking about having the right quantities. Some medium foods will be low GL, so melon is a medium GI food, that is low GL. But you can't actually work out the GI, the glycemic index of a food, by looking at the sugar content. It's all done by blood tests in the laboratory, and unfortunately we can't work it out just by looking at the label. We can only go on what looks to be a high sugar content in a food. When we're thinking about the glycemic load of a food, we know that a high GL food is 20 and above, and I can think of some healthy eating ready-made curries in a very well-known supermarket, which are actually around about 23, 24 GLs. It's really high. Medium GL foods are 11 to 19, low GLs are 10 and below. Now, if you know the GI value, so the glycemic index of a food, you can work out the glycemic load of a particular food. You need to know the total carbs in a serving, and you take the glycemic index, you divide that number by 100, and the GL value is A times B, so that's the total carbs multiplied by the GI value, which has been divided by 100. But by far the simplest way is to use the GL counters, which are available to you on the website. But if we look at a slice of watermelon, which we've talked about before, a slice which weighs 120 grams will have just 6 grams of carbs in it. And we know that the glycemic index of the watermelon is 72. When we divide that by 100, we get 0.72. We multiply that by 6, which gives us 4.32, and that's rounded down to 4 GL. So we know that that slice of watermelon is a healthy snack. Again, you can do an approximate GL calculation if a food lists the ingredients by percentage. So just for instance, if you've got a soup which weighs 300 grams and it says that the potato content is 15%, you can work out that the potato content is 45 grams. Now, using the GL counter, we know that 45 grams of potato is about 5 GL. So therefore you can work out the GL value of the soup, assuming that there are no other starchy carbs in it, is around about 5 GLs. But again, by far the easiest, use your GL counters and make the fantastic soups which are in the recipe book. When you're buying a food that's a carbohydrate, you've got to be very cautious, particularly if you're buying bread or pasta. Choose the whole grains or the whole wheat or the whole meal. Remember that anything that is white or refined is so processed that it breaks down very easily in your system, releasing the carbohydrate content quickly, and basically there is very little of nutritional value in there. And white or refined foods may have sugar added to them, flavour improvers or enhancers. And you do need to be a little bit of a detective around sugar. There's so many different names for it. And I've seen products which have had 2 or 3 of these listed. They are all different names for sugar. So glucose, fructose, sucrose, dextrose, maltose, lactose. Anything with O's on the end is a sugar. But beware of syrup, honey, treacle, fruit juices. They are also very, very high in sugar. And another one that can catch us out and fool us are labels that say no added sugar. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the product is low in sugar. It depends upon the ingredients. So study the food label carefully. If, say, for instance, you see number 1 on the list is dates, you know that dates are very high GL, and so that product will be high in sugar. It's really worth studying the labels, looking at the fat content and avoiding the trans and the hydrogenated fats. These are fats that have had their chemical structure altered, and they basically are utterly useless to the body and provide it with a toxic challenge to eliminate. Be very, very cautious of low fat products. So anything that's less than 3 grams of fat per 100 grams might be okay, but remember that where the manufacturer has created a low fat product, it very often doesn't taste as nice as it should do, so they load it with sugar to try and improve the taste. So again, look out for that sugar content. And again, if something says it's reduced fat, it can still be very high in fat. Just because it's reduced doesn't mean that it's low fat. And if you see light, I mean, I've seen all sorts of things like light mayonnaise and light cream cheese products, but light in what? They are very non-specific. about what the product is light in, and sometimes it's just the colour of it. So you've got to be very careful, because these food manufacturers spend millions of pounds on their marketing to try and fool you into believing that their products are really good and healthy for you. Beware of additives in foods. There are a lot of colourings, flavourings, preservatives or thickeners which are deemed safe by the EU. They are given an E number, but they can trigger reactions in some people. So hyperactivity and asthma. The worst are things like sunshine yellow, tartrazine, the blue colours. There is a great book, it's been out for years, and it's called E for Additives. So if you think that you are susceptible to additives, it's really well worth getting a hold of that book, and you can use that to check what is actually really in the food that you're eating. So go for less processed foods, and you're going to avoid all these additives. Remember, the preservatives are chemicals, the flavours are chemicals, they're not natural. But if you go for making your own food, you do know what's in it.